Good morning, friends. Happy Mother's Day. I'm just pulling something up there. Happy Mother's Day. Or as I like to say, Happy Women's Day. I think that today is a day that we celebrate all women, whether you have kids, whether you are a foster parent, whether you are a maternal mother-like figure to someone, we celebrate you today. All women, every way, shape, and form. Today is your day. So happy Mother's Day. I am coming to you live from a guest bedroom at my friend's Airbnb. The Eberths have reached the point in quarantine that everybody needs to constantly be hanging on mom and near mom at all times. So it's a little bit easier if I could get away. Unfortunately, my friends have this Airbnb right up the street. As everybody knows, New Song is not a fancy church, so we don't have a recording studio or fancy recording equipment. We're super grateful to have Joe figuring this all out for us, but we are also just grateful to have friends with Airbnbs and space to do this. So that's where I am, in case you're wondering. Today, we're going to be talking about Esther and the book of Esther. And I want us to look at how her culture shaped her identity and how our culture shapes our identity versus God's plan and purpose for us. So let's dig right in. We're going to start in chapter 1, where we are introduced to King Xerxes. He has another name. It's Ahasuerus, and that's harder to say than Xerxes, and I'm going to be saying it a lot. So it's the same guy, all right? But I'm going to say Xerxes. Now, he has this big party. It lasts about 180 days, which is probably a hyperbole historically. But the point is he has this big party, and he asks something of his wife, and that's what we're going to pick up, starting at chapter 1, verse 11. He says that his servants, they were to bring King Vashti before him wearing the royal crown. She was gorgeous, and he wanted to show off her beauty both to the general public and to his important guests. But Queen Vashti refused to come as the king had ordered through the eunuchs. Now, it might not seem like that big of a deal. The king has these guests over, and he wants to introduce his wife and wants her to wear the crown. But the problem is that he wants her to only wear the crown. King Xerxes is asking his wife, asking Queen Vashti to come and parade naked in front of everyone wearing the royal crown. He wants her to entertain them, and she says no. So then we go on. The king was furious, his anger boiling inside. Now, when a need arose, the king would often talk with certain very smart people about the best way to handle it. They were people who knew both the kingdom's written laws and what judges had decided about cases in the past. So he has these group of advisors that he goes to, people that know the law, and he says, here's what happened, what should I do? He is mad and embarrassed and wants to make sure this will never happen again. So here's what he says. Or what the advisor says. Queen Vashti, he said, has done something wrong not just to the king himself. She has also done wrong to all the officials and all the people in all the provinces of King Xerxes. This is the reason. News of what the queen did will reach all women, making them look down on their husbands. They will say, King Xerxes ordered servants to bring Queen Vashti before him, but she refused to come. This very day, the important women of Persia and Media who hear about this queen will tell the royal officials the same thing. There will be no end of put-downs and arguments. So this woman, Queen Vashti, has disobeyed her husband. And now the advisors are worried that other women are going to hear about that, and there's going to be an uprising, and no women are going to obey their husbands anymore. So there must be a law, and it must warn them to never do this again. So here's the law they come up with for Queen Vashti. Now, if the king wishes, says the advisor, let him send out a royal order and have it written into the laws of Persia and Media, laws no one can ever change. It should say that Vashti will never again come before King Xerxes. Notice it doesn't say Queen Vashti anymore. It should also say that the king will give her royal place to someone better than she. So, Not only has she lost her position as queen, he divorces her, he ends that, but now the law is going to say that there's going to be a better queen after her. So this is what happens, so you should not disobey men. That is our introduction to the king. That's where we're starting from, okay? And then a couple years later, the king realizes that might have been a little dramatic, and he is missing his queen, or at the very least, what she could offer him. So, something later, when King Xerxes was less angry, he remembered Vashti. This is chapter 2. What she had done and what he had decided about her. So his young male servants, obviously realizing he's upset, said, "Let the king have a search made for beautiful young women who haven't yet married, and let the king choose certain people in all the royal provinces to lead the search. Have them bring all the beautiful young women together to the fortified part of Susa." I think it's really easy at this point of the story to think about this as like a Cinderella story. The king needs a new queen, and so they go out in all the land to all the willing women to see who fits the glass slipper. That is not what is happening here. These women are being corralled against their will. They are being forced to come participate this, and it's about a year-long process. Okay, they're being forced to leave their homes and to come be a part of this, just the beautiful young ones. All right. Yeah. This is not The Bachelor. This is not a beauty pageant. This is women being corralled and forced and gathered to be a part of this process. Okay. And then we learn about Esther, finally, because she is one of the ones being forced to do this. Okay. So Mordecai had been a father to Hadassah, that is Esther, though she was really his cousin because she had neither father nor mother. So get this, she's Jewish, so she's an exile here. She is an orphan, and she is a woman. So she has all of those cultural things against her. Because she had neither father nor mother, the girl had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. When her parents died, Mordecai had taken her to be his daughter. When the king's order and his new law became public, many young women were gathered into the fortified part of Susa under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the palace to the care of Haggai, the one in charge of the women. This is a part of the story that is a little bit of a letdown. This is where we talk about how Esther is not the woman that we learned about in Sunday school. But I think that there's immense value in being as honest about people in the Bible as the Bible is about them. Right? Their flaws are recorded for a reason. And I think that we will never really identify with Esther if we convince ourselves that she's this perfect heroine, because she's not. And we're going to find that out, because Esther, like many of us, is caught up in a culture that elevates image above all else, especially for women. Esther gets lost in her beauty and has accepted a culture that says that beauty is all she has to offer. In fact, she replaces her Hebrew name, Hadassah, for Esther, a Persian name. She's forgotten her culture and replaced her identity as a person of God, God's chosen people, the Jewish people. Esther has made beauty her purpose, and that has never been and will never be God's blueprint for women. Your beauty, the way you look, does not define you. That is not how God created you. But here we find out that Esther decides to play the game. Esther decides to do everything she can to become the next queen. It says, this young woman pleased him and won his kindness. This is talking about the Haggai, the guy who's in charge of the process. So every step of the way, it says that she pleased them and won their kindness. Pleased them and won their kindness. He quickly began her beauty treatments and gave her the carefully chosen foods. He also gave her 7 servants selected from among the palace servants and moved her and her servants to the nicest room in the women's house. This is a process, like I said, that lasts about a year. And the main reason for that is so that they would know if any of the women became pregnant or were pregnant. Okay. So the first part, they are given really specific foods that they can eat to make them look or be or act a way that is more pleasing to the king. And then they spend about 6 months in beauty treatments. And one of those treatments is to be bathed in fragrant oils and sweet smelling creams. Now, it's interesting that those are the words that the Bible uses, because Hadassah is Hebrew for myrtle, the myrtle plant known for sweet smelling oils in the Jewish tradition. Okay, so we're taking Hadassah, who has a name that means sweet smelling fragrance. And now she is Esther, and she's going through all these beauty treatments to make her sweet smelling. And then after all these processes, the months and months and months, each woman gets a special night with the king. And that night is their final audition, the final exam, if you will, when the king chooses who will be the next queen. And Esther is chosen. And then as we read, and scholars have kind of gathered, for the next 5 years, Esther is a very traditional queen. She does all the things that a woman is supposed to do. She is quiet, and she is pleasing and focuses on image and her beauty, and everybody else focuses on her image and beauty, and she's pleasing to her king. And even through all of this, she never reveals her true Jewish identity, because Mordecai has ordered her not to. But then a crisis shakes her awake. So we're going to read starting at chapter 3, verse 1. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, Hammedatha, the Agagit's son, by promoting him above all the officials who worked with him. So this man Haman has been promoted to be an official for the king. All the royal workers by the king's gate would kneel and bow face down to Haman because the king had ordered so. But Mordecai didn't kneel or bow down. So the royal workers at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why don't you obey the king's orders?" Day after day they questioned him, but he paid no attention to them. So they let Haman know about it, just to see whether or not Mordecai's words would hold true. He had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman himself saw that Mordecai didn't kneel or bow down to him, he became very angry. But he decided not only to kill Mordecai, for people had told him Mordecai's race. Instead, he planned to wipe out all of the Jews, all of Mordecai's people. So Mordecai doesn't bow down to Haman for various reasons that we don't need to get into now. And Haman is so mad that he calls for a genocide of the entire Jewish population, and the king offhandedly agrees. Kind of like okay, fine, do whatever you want, all right? We find out later that he might not have fully understood what was going on, but this is what Haman wants to do. Suddenly, everything in Esther's world changes. Her system of keeping everyone happy comes crashing down. The two most important men in her life, Xerxes and Mordecai, are at odds, and she can no longer be on both sides. So Mordecai sends word to Esther about what's going on, and here's how she responds to him. Chapter 4, verse 11. All the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there's a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner courtyard without being called is put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I haven't been called to come to the king for the past 30 days. So Esther says, I can't do anything about it. This is not my position. This is not my place. I can only come when I'm asked to come, and I haven't been summoned for 30 days, so I cannot help with this. To which Mordecai replies, don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews, you'll come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very important time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews from another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you came to be a part of the royal family. Other translations say, maybe you were born for such a time as this. Now Esther is at a crossroads. Now, instead of having someone think for her and take care of her, she has to think and take care of herself using the voice that God gave her for the good of her people. Esther has to find a voice and speak out against injustice in a system that has tried to silence her. This woman has never had to take a stand, and now she must stand up to the most powerful man in this country. Now, Esther, like I think a lot of us, has been trying to live in two worlds. She's been trying to live both for the king and for men who say that her beauty and her body and her image is what defines her and all she has to offer the world. And for a God who says, I created you to be a powerful world changer. This is not to criticize her at all. It is to identify with her. I think you would be hard-pressed to find a woman who hasn't struggled with some degree of that, who she is versus who the world tells her she's supposed to be. Esther's story restores our hope that God has important purposes for women, whether we believe it in the depths of our soul or not. Because what does she do first? She tries to dodge it, right? She tries to say, can't do it, not my thing. I think we do that too. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. I'm not this enough. Because the world tells us over and over that we are not enough, right? But then Mordecai reminds her of the looming Holocaust that is coming. Don't think that just because you're in the palace, this doesn't apply to you. Maybe you were created for such a time as this. This situation requires her to go against everything that her culture and her upbringing has taught her about being a woman. So I think her first battle in this, before even facing the king, is to face and overcome these deep-seated beliefs and the fears that go with them. If I'm not who the world says I'm supposed to be, then who am I? What can I do? And she responds. Chapter 4, she says to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. She's asking them to fast. They are to eat or drink anything for 3 whole days, and I myself will do the same, along with my female servants. Then, even though it's against the law, I will go to the king. And if I am to die, then I will die. So Mordecai left where he was and did exactly what Esther had ordered him. She makes a stand. She decides, this is what I'm going to do. And this is one of my favorite parts. What does Mordecai do? He obeys. He follows her lead. This is crazy for the culture, right? For a woman to give an order to a man and for a man to obey. But her first change begins at the core of her being. Once she remembers that she is a child of God, an image bearer of God, then she puts words to action. She is terrified. If I'm to die, I'm going to die, okay? She realizes the magnitude of this. She doesn't know the end of the story like we might. I think we can relate to that too, because we know that the prayers and fasting of God's people, joined with our trust in God, are right and true and sacred and holy, but they are no guarantee that our lives will be spared. Esther easily could have become a martyr, but she steps out and she takes a risk. And then we see, and in her confrontation with the king, 3 days later, Esther puts on the royal clothes and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace, facing the palace itself. At that moment, the king was inside, sitting on his royal throne and facing the palace doorway. When the king noticed Queen Esther standing in the entry court, he was pleased. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand, and she came forward and touched the scepter's tip. Then the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What do you want? I will give you anything, even half the kingdom." Esther answered, "If the king wishes, please come today with Haman for the feast that I have prepared for him." "Hurry, get Haman," the king ordered, "so we can do what Esther says." So the king and Haman come to the feast that Esther has prepared. As they sipped wine, the king asked, "Now what is it that you wish? I'll give it to you. What do you want? I'll do anything, even give you half the kingdom." Esther answered, "This is my wish, and this is what I want. If I please the king, and if the king wishes to grant my wish and my desire, I would like the king and Haman to come to another feast that I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will answer the king's question." It's working! But you can see her hesitation. She keeps putting it off. She's not actually going to say the actual thing yet. Baby steps. She's getting there. But she finds in this her true strength and her true identity. She is stronger than she has ever allowed herself to be. Before she gets the kings earlier in the story, She gets the king's attention through her beauty and her body and her image. And now it is through her words and her confidence and her courage. Down to chapter 7, verse 1. When the king and Haman came in for the banquet with Queen Esther, the king said to her, "This is the second day we've met for wine. What is your wish, Queen Esther? I'll give it to you. And what do you want? I'll do anything, even give you half the kingdom." Queen Esther answered, "If I please the king and the king wishes, give me my life. That's my wish. And the life of my people too. That is my desire. We have been sold, I and my people, to be wiped out, killed, and destroyed. If we simply had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have said nothing. But no enemy can compensate the king for this kind of damage." King Xerxes said to Queen Esther, "Who is this person and where is he? Who would dare do such a thing?" Esther replied, "A man who hates, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Haman was overcome with terror in the presence of the king and queen. Furious, the king got up and left the banquet for the palace garden, but Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life. He saw clearly that the king's mood meant a bad end for him. When theologian Carolyn Custis James talks about Esther, she talks about the dramatic change from a passive, compliant woman who is dependent on others to think for her into a powerful leader of the Jewish people who is tenacious and smart and politically savvy in spite of a culture that devalues women. Now, you may have noticed this. It's a little bit ironic about the book of Esther, but Hebrew scholars think it's genius about the book of Esther, is that God is not mentioned. There's no voice. There's no miracle. There's no vision. Even when talking about the fasting, there's no mention of God. Yet God, through Esther, is the hero of this story. He keeps his promises and defends people through people. Through Esther in this case, and Mordecai, who is in a position that he can do nothing but appeal to Esther, a woman, for her help, for his life. God calls them to act by exposing the need, by telling them to throw off their hindrances and the lies of who culture and their context says that they're supposed to be, and to listen to who God says they are and who God says they are not. We cannot allow our culture and our context to define what we are capable of, especially in the face of injustice. God always advocates for the good of humanity in spite of, or perhaps in the midst of, our fears and our weaknesses. It wasn't until this humanitarian crisis that Esther made this change. Esther, before this, lived by her culture's view of what gave her value. She had been warned, especially by what happened to Vashti, to remain quiet, to stay out of trouble, to keep your convictions to yourself. She learned that all that mattered was on the outside. So friends, what lies are you believing about your identity? What does your culture or your context or your religion tell you about yourself that doesn't ring true to your soul? I want to encourage you to take some time today and sit in that. Listen for that. Just 5 minutes. Do it today or you won't do it. Trust me. Just be still and listen to the truest voice inside you. God, the Holy Spirit inside you, because evil would love to shut you down, to keep you worrying about what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to be, instead of being who you truly are, because who you truly are will change the world, and that scares evil. Esther was not a trophy wife. She was a leader. God made her beautiful, but he didn't create her for passivity or to satisfy the selfish desires of others. Passivity won't take God's image bearers very far. Esther had no choice. She was created for this. You have no choice. You were created for this. It is in you. This was her calling as a woman, to wage war against injustice and to fight for people. God didn't just find something for Esther to do. This wasn't some little job so that she wouldn't get bored and could feel useful. God doesn't patronize us. God gave Esther a vital job that no one else could do. Now, I want to make two very important notes about the men in her life. First, Xerxes. I want to be careful how I say this, but this was only a marriage in the sense of the law. Even though she was his wife, she was mostly shut out. Esther's story is a story to women who long to be partners and equals in their marriage or in some other important relationship, but for one reason or another are shut out. No matter how much she wants to come alongside and be a source of good with Xerxes, he will never fully let her. Her husband doesn't want a partnership. He wasn't interested in her faith or advice. If he wanted advice, he would go to his 7 advisors. If he wanted encouragement or comfort, he would go elsewhere. Sometimes it is not possible for a woman to be a partner or an equal to her husband because he keeps her at arm's length. This is not the way it is supposed to be. This is not okay. This is not how God intended marriage. But Xerxes, and this is what I want you to hear, Xerxes does not change who God made Esther to be. Even though he shuts her out, this is still her calling. This is still her purpose. On a lighter note, I don't want to forget about Mordecai. You got to talk about Mordecai. Bless him. He faithfully loved and sacrificed and provided and protected a young orphaned Esther. And then he reached the point where he realized that he needed her. God has a way of drawing men and women into strong alliances. And the reverse is true for Esther. Every woman benefits from a Mordecai, a husband, a partner, a father, a close friend, to encourage and speak truth that perhaps we were created for such a time as this. Mordecai refuses to accept any excuses, but encourages her to keep going. Who is this Mordecai in your life? For me, it's my husband. It's Kyle, who always pushes me and encourages me and shuts down the lies and reminds me of the truth of who God made me to be. Kyle has wanted for a long time to work towards his master's at Fuller. He has some classes but has wanted to complete it. And then we decided together that I was going to be the one to go to Fuller, to go to seminary right now and work towards my master's. This is what it means to be a Mordecai. Men, be a Mordecai for the women in your life. Encourage them to seek hard and passionately after whomever God made them to be. Don't control or try to overshadow. In fact, this often means you will be in their shadow. Be okay with that. Celebrate that, and then follow them. Trust them. Learn from them. As women, we are responsible to step out wherever and whenever God calls, with or without the encouragement of men. But it is so much better when the men in our life acknowledge their need for our gifts and do whatever they can to empower us. The role reversal in this story, when Esther commands Mordecai, affirms this relationship when he does what she asks, right? This is unheard of in this society, for a woman to command a man and a man to obey. Listening and acting in response to Esther as his leader, as a spiritual leader for her people. Esther is no longer dependent on Mordecai, but she is not necessarily independent of him either. I think we need to remember that. They are equal, standing together in this battle. This is God's plan for men and women from the beginning. So what I want to end with is this. Where do you place your focus? Does culture tell you that you have to be a certain size, and so your mind is filled with the when and how much and what of food, and the when and the how much and what of exercise? Maybe we stop and we think that maybe culture is telling us to get smaller, and that is exactly how evil wants to control our influence in the world. Does culture have you refocusing on all, or have you not refocusing, but focusing on all the things you need to do or accomplish to be the perfect wife, mom, professional, chef, teacher, all the hats you're trying to wear, especially right now in this crazy time? And all the while making it look easy, right? And Pinteresty and perfect. Maybe that's evil's way of distracting us from loving others because we're too busy comparing ourselves or trying to become like other people. Does culture tell you that success is measured by what you have instead of what you do or how you love people? Maybe evil is worried that our money will go to fighting injustice instead of perpetuating it. Does culture tell you that you will never be as smart as a man? So don't raise your hand. Stay quiet, or you might sound stupid. Maybe evil is terrified of the wisdom that God has put inside of you, inside of me, inside of us, about what would happen if women spoke up instead of complied. It would be detrimental to evil's plans. Like Esther, we have a choice to listen to the lies of the world or the truth from our Creator, the Creator of the world who made us, who probably actually knows what we're made of. What would have happened if Esther had chosen to listen to the lies she had been brought up to believe about who she was and what her purpose was? Fortunately, we don't have to find out, but I would imagine there would be a lot of death and a lot of lost opportunity for life. What will be lost if we listen to Hollywood or social media or marketing or models or patriarchy or everybody's highlight reels in their life to tell us who we're supposed to be? Or maybe the more hopeful message, and the message that I want you to hear today, the point I'm trying to make, is that how will this world change if we believe God, who says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made? The God who calls us Azar Kenegdo in Genesis, which means warrior. That is our identity from the creation of the world. Azar Kenegdo, a warrior. Do not let the world take away your warrior status. God, thank you for the women and the men and all who are listening this morning. God, bless them. Pour your blessing and your favor over them, God. I pray that that these words from you, from this book, will ring true, God, that your Spirit will remind us, will point out the things that we are focused on, that are lies, that are untrue, that are distracting and wasting so much time. God, you have a whole world to love and to make changes for, to destroy evil and to bring out good. And yet we waste so much time trying to be something different than you created us to be. God, destroy those lies. Raise us up to be the women, the warriors you created us to be. And God, bring these men alongside with us to encourage and to uplift us and to empower all that you have for your world. Amen.